All right, today we are jumping into a really fascinating and, let's be honest, a very unconventional text called A Lesson in Judicial Ju-Jitsu. Our whole goal here is just to unpack the alternative financial system that it describes, and everything we talk about is pulled directly from the source material itself. Look, it's important to say right up front, these ideas are a very specific point of view, and they're pretty far from what you'd call mainstream legal practice. Our job isn't to prove or disprove any of it, but simply to explain the system exactly as it's laid out in the text. So let's dive in.
So let's just start with a wild idea. What if every single bill, every single summons, every financial demand that lands on your doorstep wasn't really an obligation, but just an offer? An offer that you had the power to accept, to reject, or even flip completely on its head. This is the radical idea at the very heart of the system we're about to explore.
And the name the text gives this whole process, it's pretty memorable. Judicial Ju-Jitsu. The whole idea is right there in the name. It's about using an opponent's own commercial energy and momentum against them, flipping what they say is a debt into a liability that they, the original sender, now actually owe to you. It's a total reversal of how we normally think about who owes what.
Okay, but to even begin to get your head around how this is supposed to work, you first have to understand the worldview it's all built on. The text lays out a reality it calls a corporate matrix, and it is fundamentally different from the world most of us think we live in.
So, get this. To build its case, the source presents a list of what it calls factoids to set up this alternate reality. I mean, it claims that the IRS isn't part of the US government, but an agency of the IMF. It says you don't actually own property, you're just a tenant. It even says America is still a British colony. According to the text, you absolutely have to understand this context to get the logic of the steps that come next.
And this right here, this is the absolute cornerstone of that whole worldview. The idea that there are two of you. There's the living man or woman, that's the real you, the creator of credit, the principal. And then there's your legal fiction, the straw man. This is the entity represented by your name written in all capital letters, and that's the one the system sees as the debtor. According to the text, the biggest mistake people make is confusing the two.
All right, so with that worldview locked in, let's look at the first major tactic in this jujitsu move. It's a concept the text calls accepting for value.
So the first big mental flip you have to make is how you see a bill. The text argues that any bill or charge isn't really a demand for payment, it's an offer. And for that offer to even be valid, it has to come with its own means of settlement. It's like saying every invoice arrives with this invisible, uncashed check attached to it, just waiting for the right person to authorize it.
And this is exactly why, according to the source, you never just pay the bill the normal way. The author warns, and I'm quoting directly here, when you offer some sort of settlement, you are admitting that you owe them something. Big mistake. See, the goal isn't to pay the debt, it's to make the original sender settle the account that they created.
So this is where the key maneuver accepted for value comes in. It's described as this very specific act of conditional acceptance. You accept the bill, yeah, but you do it in a way that basically authorizes the sender, the offerer, to use the credit that you created as a living person to settle their own charge. You're not paying it, you're redirecting the obligation right back to the source.
Now, this whole process isn't just about using fancy words on paper. Oh no. It brings in a key player and gives them a shocking amount of power, the notary public. And I'm not kidding about the power. This might be one of the most striking claims in the entire text. It states, flat out, the notary has more power than a Supreme Court judge. This isn't just a casual comparison. The entire enforcement of this system hinges on the incredible authority it gives to the notary.
So why the notary? What's the logic here? Well, the text argues that because a notary is an officer of the court, their official witness is everything. So when a company doesn't respond correctly to your accepted for value notice, the notary can officially certify that failure as a commercial dishonor. And that official certification is what gives this whole process its teeth.
And all of this leads to the grand finale, the final flip in this jujitsu maneuver. This is the part where a debt that was haunting you suddenly transforms into a tangible asset that you can collect.
Now, the text gets really deep into the weeds with the administrative process, but if we boil it all down, it looks something like this. First, you accept their offer for value. Then you serve a series of notices, all through the notary. When they don't respond correctly, the notary issues what's called a certificate of default. And that certificate becomes the basis for a UCC-1 filing, which turns the original sender into your debtor.
Okay, so let's walk through that transformation together.
Picture this. It all starts with something we all know. A bill shows up in the mail. But, importantly, it's addressed to your name in all capital letters, what the system calls your legal straw man.
Now, instead of reaching for your checkbook, your first move is to stamp accepted for value on it. By doing this, as the process describes it, you, the living person, are authorizing the company that sent the bill to settle the account they just created using the credit that is rightfully yours.
And, the system is banking on what's probably going to happen next. The company on the other end is likely going to have no idea what to do with this. They'll fail to act, and that failure, that's what the text calls commercial dishonor. This is the critical moment where the notary steps in to make that failure official by issuing a certificate.
And that certificate of dishonor? That's the final piece of the puzzle. Boom. The Ju-Jitsu flip is complete. The original claim they had against you is gone, and in its place, a brand new debt has been created, one that the original company now owes to you. And according to the text, you can then go after them to collect on that new asset.
So, after walking through all those mechanics, you might be asking yourself, why? What is the appeal of a system like this? Why would someone go down such an unconventional path? Well, the text gives us some pretty clear reasons.
Well, a huge part of the strategy is that this is all meant to be an administrative process, not a judicial one. The whole idea is to win the battle on paper, through notices, through certifications, and to get the whole thing resolved before it ever lands in front of a judge. The text basically argues that by the time you'd ever go to court, the game is already over.
This quote from the source just perfectly sums up the whole mindset, doesn't it? Remember, if you are not prosecuting, you are defending. If you are defending, you will lose. It is aggressively proactive. The system is designed to put you on the offense, to make you the one prosecuting a claim, not the one defending against one.
So when you boil it all down, the ultimate takeaway from the text is that this whole process is presented as a tool for accountability. The stated goal is to cut right through all the corporate shields and hold the actual individuals making these financial claims personally liable for what the author calls fraud and extortion.
And that really leaves us with a big question to chew on, right? No matter what you think about the specifics of this process, the fact that it even exists and the detailed world that it builds, it really makes you wonder, what does this passionate search for systems like this reveal about our relationship with the often confusing and, let's face it, intimidating worlds of law and finance? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me.